Flying with Strangers in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. Fantastic to be here. I'm with the most amazing and awesome Marian Johnson. Marian, fantastic to have you here. Hey, look, just to start off, every leader has something that gets them up in the morning and something that really kind of lights their fire. What's it for you? What is it that just kind of gives you that zing, that passion?
Well, I think it's two things. One is a big picture vision, and the big picture vision is all about transforming the New Zealand economy to a knowledge economy, from primary industry to knowledge economy.
Yep.
And the reason that we're doing that is because of the requirement for sustainability, but also because it's going to lift all of our boats with higher value jobs, etc. And it'll also allow us to lead on the world stage in terms of a role model for how you might do innovation better,
Yep.
how you might do innovation and how you might do startup better, and how a knowledge economy can look on a evenly democratized basis. We're a progressive nation. We have that reputation. Let's see what we can do here.
Yeah.
So that's one big vision that gets me up in the morning. But the thing that I love that gets me up in the morning, I mean, that's the overarching kind of goal. It's just meeting all the incredible people I get to meet. And because there are all these talented founders and innovators and people who are working on really high impact stuff across every sector you can think of, I get to see them really early, and that's incredible. What a freaking honor.
That's a real formative stage as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and then I'll go out, with some of my friends, to go for a walk in the hills or whatever, and I'll talk about someone that I met and how, approximately. I mean, obviously not downloading any secrets, but some of the things that I see are coming down the pipeline, and people just have no awareness of what the future is bringing. None whatsoever. They are still stuck in these industries of the 20th century, and it just blows my mind. Yeah. So I'm obviously really lucky to be there. Yeah.
And you've had a very varied background. You've not born in this country. You've been in different industries and different, media, etc. What is it about that journey that's brought you to here? That's given you those skills and that fire to actually make a difference into that startup ecosystem?
My journey is totally all over the place, but you could kind of put it into two segments. There was the before New Zealand and then the after New Zealand.
Right.
So basically, my first job was at a company called Major Market Television in New York City, and I repped, I think it was 52 TV stations across the country. And essentially what I did was called, quote unquote, brand solutions. And so I would work with glamour brands like Unilever's Whisk Power Scoop Ultra Laundry Detergents.
Ooh, you can remember that.
Yes. And then work out how I was going to shift their share upward in Little Rock, Arkansas. Right. So I can tell you this. That was a slog, but man, did it teach me some of the dynamics of, obviously how marketing, media, brand, product managers, FMCG, it gave me a really good view of that landscape. And it cemented a reputation for me as somebody who was really strong at selling strategic solutions that would shift products. And so I left from there and I went to Budapest, and I launched Budapest's first commercial TV station. And I'm proud to say that I introduced the Hungarians to Benny Hill. Which ran on the 11:30 slot. Yeah, I don't think that would be allowed.
That with my, brilliant.
But all sorts of other stuff.
It's an interesting claim to fame. I love it that you landed on that.
But this was another one where we had a commercial TV station that was on satellite, and just essentially building the story, launching it out, finding our customers, building the eyeballs, and then selling it to commercial properties, everyone from Unilever to Procter & Gamble and all my good friends at Sony PlayStation and so on and so on. So again, cutting my teeth on the storytelling piece, but also the strategic partnerships, really. It's about scanning to see who needs what you've got, and then being able to tell a really strong story. And instead of trying to sell them your product, it's actually about seeing what their needs are and then coming up with solutions for them.
Music to my ears.
Yeah. And then finally, so then I went to the UK, and then I worked for Universal Studios, and then for Discovery Networks, doing very similar roles. And then I met my Kiwi husband in a bar in Shoreditch called the Dragon Bar. And about 2 years later, when we were married and we had our very first baby, like all good Kiwis, he wanted to come home. Yeah. So we came to Christchurch. And at first I sort of had this fantasy for myself of I'm just going to be a mommy at home. I'm finally going to be able to like can the nanny and just do this myself, because I've always been multitasking. I've never given it what I really wanted to. And then I arrived in Christchurch, and this is a city at that time, 17 years ago, of primary industry.
Yes.
There's nothing here for me. There was no media, big media company. If anything, that would have been Auckland, but not even. That's Sydney, Singapore, London, New York. So I really had to reinvent myself in a really huge way. And I think along the way, I somehow slid into a software company as the managing director, focusing on building applications around water management and farm management and sustainability. Learned more than I ever thought I would know about fertilizers and dairy, and but again, refining that question of problem solution and then scaling that product successfully. But software was not my bag. I wasn't particularly good at it, although I could find those customers and tell the story. And then the next role that I had was at my very first New Zealand startup. Right. And that was Fluent IQ, which was one of the powerhouse stable. Yes. So I did 2 years with Fluent, where I was responsible for all of the market validation and worked with the CEO on raising capital. And it was just an incredible learning experience from start to finish. I could tell you some stories from that time that wouldn't surprise you at all about the environment at that stage. And then I moved over to Ministry of Awesome, thinking to myself how Ministry of Awesome had been so helpful to me in terms of finding those early customers locally with, University of Canterbury and other different players. And knowing the challenge of those very early stage of finding your first customers, your first paying customers, working out what your business model was, validating with your customers, and just getting that flywheel starting to move at the same time as raising capital, at the same time as, wearing 3 or 4 other hats.
Keeping the lights on.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. It's you got to be multidisciplinary, tasking all the time.
Absolutely.
So that background, music to my ears, you talk about the story, you talk about ICP, you talk about, getting that flywheel. That sets you up very well to build a set of, with the Ministry of Awesome, a set of offerings or capabilities that are, kind of allowing tech companies to start up, which is often the hardest part.
Yeah.
When we look at the venture capital piece, and I know that we've had, when we talked, the startup ecosystem is incredibly important for building that funnel of the future Zeros and the future Vens of the world.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a lot of pressure on VCs to invest, and there's been comments that in the last 18 months there's not enough investable companies. There's not enough companies that can actually, we see the VCs can see a return. Mm-hmm. What's the gap, and how do we start to bridge the gap between the VCs wanting to invest in Y and companies creating themselves, but they're not being seen to be something that they want to be invested in?
Yeah. In hard numbers, what we know from, and I was a member of the Startup Council, which convened last year and then produced the Upstart Nation report, and there were a number of recommendations that basically had to do with the 4 C's, and because I'm on the spot, I'm going to completely forget them. They're capital, connectivity, culture, and next one. I'll come up with it later.
We can edit it then.
Yeah.
That's okay. AI, thank you.
And one of the key pieces of that was a recommendation around and an acknowledgement of the importance of the pipeline. Yeah. And, there's 2 differing points of view here. If you speak to some people, particularly people who are in Auckland, which is at a different stage than the rest of the country, they say entrepreneurial density is strong. We have more people contacting us than we can serve. But then when you actually talk to people who are allocating capital, they say there's not enough good people out there. Well, then the response to that, in my view, is widen the pipeline. You need more people in the pipeline. And the numbers bear that out, that at this moment, we have about 2,400 startups across the country. and we need 5,000 to be hitting it at the pace we need to be if we're going to achieve the ambitions that we want to achieve in the next 10 years, or I think it's by 2030 was the goal. So that's not even 10 years, that's 6. We're running out of time. And so what that means, in order for us to get to 5,000, we're going to really have to activate so many more people in our ecosystem. And one way of doing that is by addressing culture and essentially doing one of the key pieces that Ministry of Awesome has always done and other organizations like MOA has always done, which is making startup a thing. You know, if you walk down the sidewalks in New York City, you're going to find that 1 out of 15 people is founding a startup, whether they have any hope in hell of getting to success or not. They have a vision and they have an ambition and they feel that they can achieve it and they're working on it.
So what's the one thing if you could do one thing in New Zealand, what would that be to make being a startup a thing?
I think it's about, I would love to see a TV program that is basically maybe a fly on the wall of being a high growth startup founder. I think it would be so fun. I think it would be fun to watch. It would be better than, I don't know, Dragon's Den, better than reality shows.
Married at First Sight.
Better than Married at First Sight. And these are real, I mean, and it doesn't have to be pumped up and full of, you know, horrible drama, but a real story of how does it go from start to finish. You know?
There is a lot of horrible drama in that story, but
there is drama.
There's also a lot of success and you know, people making a difference and impact. Yeah, brilliant. I love that. It's a great idea.
I mean, because what we need is a national platform or enough consistent noise around being a startup founder. What does it mean? How do you go for it? How do you find an idea? What classes should you sign? You know, how do you begin this process so that all of those people who are kind of filtering through what they might want to do and whether or not to give something a try are convinced to go to the next step and delve a little bit further.
It's how do you bring it to mainstream, and you then have to hit mainstream media. I love the TV idea. There we go. We might have some producers watching, so there we go. We can broker some deals. We're seeing a lot of, so, you know, you talk about filling the funnel with 2,400 need to get to 5,000 to get to that 2030 goal. We are seeing an emergence of deep tech, med tech, but we know that that's often long-term and high risk. How do we balance that? And what advice do you give to startup founders who are in that deep tech, you know, med tech space where we know the payoff is going to be longer? What's the advice that you can give to them to help them to potentially be more successful, think about their runway in a different way?
I mean, the deep tech space is so rife with challenges along the way, least of all trying to develop something that has never existed before that may or may not work. And so it really relies so heavily on existing agencies who assist in this area, like, for example, Callahan, for example, Kiwi early on in the piece when it comes to educational institutions and CRI, and they do an enormous amount of work in that space. It's not really a space where people pop out and work with Ministry of Awesome until they are a little bit closer.
Right.
Because there's no point really in, well, it's not that there's no point. You do need to do market validation, but working on things like marketing, sales pipeline, all of that stuff, that's later.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
That's so much later. So in terms of commercialization, they have to understand the process and I think more of those.
So understand the process of
commercialization.
Yeah, got it.
And then understand whether they want to be doing that.
Right.
Because there are quite a few researchers, obviously. There's a ton of people out there who are innovating, who don't necessarily want to run a startup.
Right.
You know, they just want to stay next to their microscope, or they want to continue working in the lab. They want to discover. That's their passion. And so they need a partner. And so the models that are out there with the kind of the Callahan deep tech groups like the WNTs and the Bridge West and Pacific, is it Pacific Channel? No, there's another one. the three that are working in that space have a model that allows that to happen. So they can identify deep tech that needs commercialization, and then they can either bring in the commercializer to work alongside the original, the person who understands the sector and who knows the science and is developing the innovation. But at the same time, I think it would be useful for us to be able to scrape many more of those into the funnel. So just as mainstream needs to know a little bit more about what is startup and why would you want to be in it, potentially those people who are in those very early stages of discovery and innovation might also get bitten by the bug a little bit earlier.
And it's almost, how do you catch them early and help them identify whether they've got what it takes to understand the process of commercialization, and do they want to go down that road? And if they don't, how do we then match them with a process, a people, a group that allows their incredible, discoveries, etc., to be commercialized?
Exactly.
And is that something that where do you see that happening the best today? Because we, know at the Kiwi Awards last year, there was a large number of call-outs of some of those incredible scientists who had, been toiling away for 5 years through that commercial model, and we're now seeing some breakthrough. None of them were in New Zealand. They were all offshore now in large laboratories where they were being able to be fostered like inside a university, but more inside a laboratory. How does that journey look like inside for a deep tech scientist type person?
I mean, one of the stumbling blocks that some of the deep tech founders that I've spoken to constantly refer to is the difficulty in then pulling the IP out of specifically universities,
right?
Because there is no one model that everyone adheres to. There's not one playbook that everyone adheres to, and there's this big conversation around, who owns what IP and how much does the university have and how much does the founder have, and
that becomes very difficult.
That becomes quite difficult, and there's some universities that are really good at navigating that, and some organizations that are really good at navigating that, and from there you are seeing a lot more startups and deep tech startups coming out of those universities, even though innovation is taking place at all universities. It would be wonderful if, and maybe they are, so I am potentially speaking out of turn, it would be wonderful if there was some form of agreement that was standardized across the entire country. And why seek to create something absolutely brand new? Why not pick up something from other successful universities who are now sitting on billions of dollars of commercialized IP.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea.
You might refer to Stanford, who is extremely successful in that, and they don't have a tussle with all of their founders that is as deep and elongated as some of the tussles that are taking place here. But I think that's just showing the kind of earlier nature of our startup ecosystem.
And we are a little bit disparate here, as you said. Before we went on camera, we were talking about this. We're one country. We're not a group of cities or different groups. It's how do we, like that idea of one set of standards where everyone knows if they're going to work inside a university, and how do we leverage that IP, and how do we take it out in a way that is predictable for people? Yeah. So just to take a little bit of a change in tack. So obviously you're super passionate about the female founder. Electrify Aotearoa, which I have to say last year for me was hands down the best event that I've attended ever.
Yay!
Was such an incredible and educative and supportive conference.
Yeah.
We know there's some inequalities in that, and then Teresa Gatting shared some of that research at the end of the event about some of the challenges. What do you see as holding us back, and what do we need to be doing differently? And I know that we've got Electrify Aotearoa coming up, and you may not want to share some of the things that maybe you do. Just give us a little bit of a sneak peek.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest problems, it's very similar to the challenge that affects the entire startup opportunity for New Zealand, except for even more so for women founders. I mean, the stats will tell you that approximately 4 out of 5 startup teams in New Zealand are all male. And that figure is actually changing. It's changing quite rapidly. We might even be now at 3 out of 4 teams since the last time it was looked at 2.5 years ago. But nonetheless, when we talk, let's use 3 out of 4 teams. Let's use a better stat.
Yes.
So let's say 3 out of 4 teams are all male, and our high growth startups are our future economy. This represents 85% of our economic growth in the next 10 years, right? So the Fisher and Paykel's will no longer be at the top of the chain. It will be, I don't know, let's make it up, Rocket Lab.
Yep.
It will be, I hope, Partly. It'll be a number of different companies that are just coming through the ranks right now. So these companies are creating our future. They're creating our future products, our future solutions, and they're also focusing on the problems that are most important to solve. And 4 out of 5, sorry, where were we? 3 out of 4 of the founders of those teams are all male. So there's 48% of the populations whose problems, whose contributions to solutions, whose experience, whose skill, all of that is lost, right? And that's not good for us as a country. I'm really not that interested in focusing on the inequity and how wrong the inequity is. Yeah. It's not so much that it's wrong. It is. It's not fair, but it's also stupid.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It's also cutting out a massive value to the startup ecosystem. 48% of the population would really help us go from 2,400 to 5,000 a whole lot faster. Okay. And we also know all the stats on how companies that have a diverse team will always perform better than those that are homogenous. Yeah. So we can see this. We can see this every day. We can see this all the time. And I think it's really important that people understand this is not a women's issue. This is a New Zealand issue. It's an economic issue. It's an economic growth issue.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, isn't it? It's not a woman's issue. It is an economic issue. So what's the one thing? What do we need to be doing differently? Yeah. So apart from the obvious of, looking more openly at what's presented in terms of startup opportunity, but what else should we be doing?
We need to bring more women into the pipeline. So that's why I'm saying it's somewhat similar. So we need to do the make startups a thing. Okay. So you are a woman founder, you have an innovative bent, you have high ambition, you want to do something that's going to have a huge impact on the world and build an exceptional global company, or maybe you don't even want that yet. You're just really curious and passionate about a problem that you want to solve and you think you can scale a solution and you're a highly capable person. Well, get started.
Yeah.
Here is your support system.
Yeah.
Go and find all the other women who are in that very early stage, and go and find all the other men. Go and find your community. But the journey for women at this stage is still very different than the journey for men. And that's why one of the outputs of Electrify Aotearoa and Electrify Accelerator is getting them peer-to-peer support with people who are in front of them and people who are behind them. And then surrounding them with mentors who are all founders, startup coaches who have been there, done that. I mean, one of the most exciting founders we're working with at the moment is somebody who has built an international global powerhouse with Cami. That's pretty exciting to be able to connect with someone like that on a one-on-one basis, download Cami's experience of building that company and going global and pulling out what you can take from that. It's also about expanding network, right?
I was going to say, it's coming down to the network.
Yep.
There is a network. We're very friendly in New Zealand. We're so happy to help other people and give people a lift up. I think it's, you're sort of saying, go out there and find your people, male, female, groups, whatever. Hanny from Elementary said, and we held a debate recently, she said there was a large group of New Zealand mafia offshore. They're the ones that can help you, also when you're looking for those connections at growth and scale.
Absolutely.
LinkedIn's a fantastic place to be able to go and connect and find that.
And so is the Edmund Hillary Foundation, and so is Kia.
Yes.
And this is all about connectivity. And we have so many people from EHF working on Electrify and on Startup Aotearoa. These are experienced operators. They're all over the world. They're friendly faces. And they are truly passionate about building that diverse startup ecosystem and helping the next woman up.
Yeah.
And it's quite phenomenal. So I think that's one of the special things about Electrify. And as far as the lineup this year, we've been really focused on making sure that we have great diversity on stage.
Yes.
So instead of having just a lineup of, incredible women founders and women working in the ecosystem, we're also bringing our allies on board, because this is not going to happen. This is not a hen's night, right? This is an event for to support women founders and find out how you can support women founders and tell the story of women founders. And we need men and women there. We need startup operators there of all genders.
Yeah.
You know, we need investors of all genders to be part of that and to be there to meet and to network and to support the community that's being built through Electrify.
And with that, and I think last year there was a lot of the theme was around those economic outcomes around
Yes.
go-to-market or brand or
Yep.
building pipeline,
Yep.
etc., told by a variety of people.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, I think for me that's just a great reminder. It is an economic issue. We've got to remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Love it. We're 2,400. We want to get to 5,000. So it's not just about throwing anything into the pipeline. So obviously we've got to make sure that as we get more people into the pipeline, it's of a reasonable quality.
Mm.
How do we start to foster potential founders earlier? Because that's in my mind where it starts. At the moment, I think of my children, I've got about to finish high school. It's being an entrepreneur, being a founder is not part of the career set that they're being told.
Yeah.
So what do we need to be doing? What do you think we need to be doing differently to be able to identify those talents and skills that could begin to foster a larger number of quality ecosystem startups?
I think that it really starts when you begin to have that awareness of what am I going to do in my future, when that sort of dialogue begins at school, at home, which is, gosh, when? I mean, I know that we've worked with people as young as 12 and 13-year-olds,
Wow.
11 and 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
From my perspective, that's really it's really too early, because there's still a lot of magical thinking. And not that there's anything wrong with magical thinking. What I mean is they're not set to get down and focus on something serious.
Yeah.
There's a time and place for that. But I think it's really when they begin to start to ruminate on what is it that I want to do with my life, that as an option should be there, should be present, should be one of a panoply. And it would really help if we could glorify our really successful innovators in the same way that we do our sporting heroes. And I think this comes down to then media, right?
Yeah.
I think it comes down to media and storytelling.
You talk about at the beginning about making it more mainstream,
Yes.
having a TV program where you see day in the life of.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing you're talking about, isn't it? Where they're getting to see it firsthand and start to understand that this is a potential thing that they could do.
Yep.
What does it mean? What sort of skills do I need? Where do I need to start?
Yep.
I think there's a role of parents as well, but when it becomes more mainstream, to say, actually, you wanted to do a lemonade stand, you made things that you sold on the side, like you've got that kind of spirit. So,
Young Enterprise Scheme already does an incredible job within high schools of identifying people who are interested in entrepreneurship, and they touch so many students.
Yeah.
And interestingly, from having spoken to the previous CEO of Young Enterprise Scheme, because we've worked together on Electrify Aotearoa, and Terry was a real supporter, and we've always been massive supporters of Young Enterprise Scheme because they're a great pipeline for our incubator and for all of the programs that we run. But really interestingly, Terry shared with me that the numbers for Young Enterprise Scheme are slightly more women than men.
Okay.
But they all drop off. Where do they go? How come they don't come back? And then they go off to tertiary, or they go off to do whatever they're doing. And then it's the men who present themselves in great numbers at incubators and other places. So what's happened? What's been lost here? And I feel that one of the things that we really need to be addressing is the fact that, in my view, running New Zealand is a small to medium size business economy, apart
very
from
small.
Some big
But
primary
it's
industry
got a big
stuff.
hockey stick, yes.
Yeah. And it is really hard to run a business.
Yeah.
It's really hard to run a small business. It's very challenging, right? And it's very challenging to run a medium-sized business. And the difference between the two is business model, product scalability, and ambition.
Yeah, ambition.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can be a consultant working in the health and safety space, or you could build a platform that could go global, taking all of your skill. And that's not a suggestion for a new product, because that's a very busy space. But you see the difference. One is how you see yourself.
Yes, it's that level of ambition.
And then how much you want to bite off. And there's a really cool phrase that I love, and I don't know if it's true. I didn't invent it. Someone gave it to me, and that was that Kiwis are really interested in getting as far as they need to go in order to have a batch, a boat, and a BMW. And then they're like, that's cool.
I heard that before. I think that's a very,
And that kind of puts it in a sense of like a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
But, I think it's also more about, well, how important are they? Like, how big do they want their impact to be? And I think, I've said this previously, but for Americans, I'll just speak from my other citizenship, right? For Americans, I am certain that all of us are created thinking we're all special and meant for something amazing.
Yeah.
Kiwis don't come at it from the same mindset. No. That's healthy. It's a little unhealthy to be skewed on the other, polar opposite. But to move somewhere in the middle would be great. Yeah. Like lose the humbleness, lose the, I don't know,
Well, it's a little bit of naivety as well. I think.
Naivety, but it's also thinking, oh, well, I'm in New Zealand. How am I going to be able to do that? We're just this little country tucked in the over here.
Yep.
But the minute you start showing how many amazing Kiwis are doing it, you start to elevate that into, I can do it. This is how.
And it's amazing. I think having met with a number of high-tech entrants in the last couple of days, there's something in those that go, this could be big. This, this could make a difference in poor countries.
Yep.
This could make a difference to people's lives.
Yep.
And I think that's that ambition and impact.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that.
And the other thing that I think really needs to happen in the startup ecosystem is we need to have a little bit more of a system that validates quickly and kills startups early. Right? So if it's not working and you don't have a pivot, stop. Yep. Hang up your gloves. Go do what you need to do. And when you're ready, come back with your next problem that you're going to solve and the next solution that you think is going to work for them. Yeah. So there are too many founders that are out there still working on their startup, some 7 years later, 8 years later, and I'm not going to put a timeline on it because some people will achieve in like year 12 and then, give me two fingers showing, see, it takes a while, and it does take a while, but at the same time, there's also those that have no traction and no revenue for 7 years. And they're just constantly going from, one business support program to another grant, to another friends and family round. And they just need to stop.
Yeah, and because actually it's not fair on them or the ecosystem.
Yeah, but it's also cutting off their opportunity to try something else.
Again, nice. Again, we're going to take just a slightly different pivot here. You talked a lot about branded marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you've had a lot of experience there. You also said, sales and marketing, you can't bring that stuff in too early. But there was a right time and place when you need to start considering your brand, but also your growth engine. How are you going to create demand, and what's the role of marketing inside your tech company to get you to scale? Startup, not tech, sorry. So what are the pitfalls that you see, what are the most common pitfalls that you see in companies either starting marketing or not doing marketing, or around using marketing to accelerate that growth?
Yeah. I mean, first things first, a really, really robust set of market validation has to come first. And that means talking to who you think are your key customers. Who is your lowest hanging fruit?
Yeah.
Target the people who have a real problem that they are willing to pay to solve. Don't ask them if they'd like to have this product and here's a free account. You haven't proven anything yet.
Yeah.
When they're willing to pay and you have when you have that first evidence of traction.
Yeah, product market fit.
When you have those first product market fit signals with your MVP, then you go back to all of the personas and the within that lowest hanging fruit, focus on the one that is the most productive, and then understand exactly what their problem is, how they refer to their problem,
Yep.
how they solve it, what are the other products they're using, what are the features that are not there, what do they love about what you have, what could they say about your product that makes them want to buy it, why is it worth it, and then take all of that information and start working on your storytelling and your messaging. It's not what you think, it's what they think.
Yeah.
Because if they're going to reach in and they're going to put their credit card up to buy your SaaS product or whatever it is, they need to feel that pain, and then they need to use your product because they really needed it.
Yes.
There's nothing worse than someone buying the product, downloading it, and then never really doing the onboarding or finishing the onboarding or activating.
Or it was
and
too complicated.
It's
or
too complicated.
It was a bad experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So just because you've got a sale doesn't mean it's done.
No, completely.
Yeah.
Start with the market, do the validation, identify who those personas are, and then go sell to them, but with a story that resonates.
Yeah.
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 And then, so then if you don't do that, so what you're saying is some of the pitfalls are not thinking about the story in that way, not using the words that your customers use and describing the way you solve the problem in your unique way. That's a challenge that you see happening.
I think it starts really with not really understanding the pain.
Yeah, okay.
Like, you need to go, oh, right, I see. That hurts. You could be fined if you do it this way.
Yeah.
You will have this loss if you do it this way. What is the fear? What is the pain? What is the thing that you're now going to erase for these people?
Yeah.
And how bad is it? And once you know that, and once you're standing in their shoes and you're in their head and you can understand this because you've spoken to a number of them about it, then you're in the position to be thinking about, all right, what is the storytelling?
Yeah, okay.
What is the storytelling and what is the messaging around your product?
Yes.
In terms of the key benefits, in terms of you can sleep at night after you have, bought my platform.
Those are the reasons to believe, aren't they? Once you've kind of made that emotional connection, person's gone, it's, to your point, it's that aha moment. Okay, someone understands my pain.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways to skin a cat. So, no one can afford to go out and hire a brand person who can sit down and do that work. I met with a company a couple of days ago, spent a huge amount of money with a brand agency. They got the work that they couldn't use it. It missed the mark. The agency never spoke to a customer once in this process. So obviously it's about capability. Not every founder is going to have that capability to be able to go out and do that work. There's lots of different ways to do that. What have you seen as the best way for these founders and startups to be able to access the skill sets they need to do that work, to be able to create that story and bring it to life on a website, in a blog, on a paid advertisement, whatever that looks like?
Well, I mean, it absolutely starts with a brief that is the right brief, because no supplier can respond to a poor brief and have any chance in hell of getting close to the mark. And I suspect that there was either something missing from the brief or a bad brief, or the agency just followed this process and didn't really pay attention. And that happens on both sides all the time.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I think it's making sure that you have someone within your organization who knows how to put a brief together for whatever the job is that needs to be done. Yeah. So if you're hiring, for example, if you're hiring a digital marketer, well, what is the job that needs to be done? And who is your persona exactly? And where are they? And how many do you need? And
all of
and
that.
The bigger picture of, and what images are available and what videos are available and how might they? And once you have that, then this person who is extremely strong with digital marketing, but perhaps knows absolutely nothing about your product or your sector, then has a really good guide for what they need to achieve.
And I think it's that, you hit the nail on the head, having that person inside your organization who can write the brief. And I think what we're seeing is a shift now, this world of fractional, where you can get someone in who is an expert to write the brief.
That's right.
To create the environment where the digital marketing or the X person can bridge the gap between the business objectives and what the product delivers and the discipline they're trying to do. And I think we're seeing that unlock more and more startups now at the right time and right place.
The fractional stuff is highly useful, but even, let's go a little bit more old school and just say even just freelancers. If you can find reliable freelancers with whom you have a trusted relationship where you can build a trusted relationship. And if you don't have any of those, then see if you can get great referrals from others in the startup ecosystem. Everybody will have web agencies, digital marketers, graphic designers, copywriters, video makers, or people who can write amazing briefs and then guide the process as a one-off project.
It's about having the right thinking.
Yeah.
We say that at Swayze. You've got to have the right thinking before you do the doing.
Yeah.
I think that's just to finish up here before we go to a few sort of more personal questions, AI. So we're seeing a lot of AI in marketing. We're seeing AI automate processes at the back end for New Zealand companies, for startups with not a lot of resource. AI can make an impact in terms of efficiencies and productivity. But the use cases are still, I'm not sure we're seeing the use cases there. Have you got any good news stories of where you're seeing it help make a difference inside a company and allowing them to be more productive and potentially start to achieve some scale?
Well, I mean, for a startup, dollars to spend on freelancers and copywriters and newsletter writers and all of the bits and pieces around marketing cost money, and there's not a lot of money in the pot if any, right? And so while those are economic options, they're potentially sometimes totally unrealistic. But one of the things that we must have in marketing is consistency of messaging, right? You can't just just give an example of, content creation. You can't just throw out a blog and then 3 years later do another one. You have to make a thing out of it. Either do it. If you're going to embark on it, stick to the schedule and have a strategy around it and what place does it play. But when it actually comes down to producing the content, well, AI is obviously awesome from that perspective. But you can almost always tell when content is being written by AI, because I don't know if you've ever gone to ChatGPT and said, can you please write this job description? And the job description spits out and it reads so beautifully and corporately.
Lots of adjectives.
Oh my gosh. And such big corporate buzzwords. It's all just so heavy and unreal. And
you can spot it a mile off.
You can tell that it's overly professional. It's overly polished.
Yes.
And
no one speaks like that.
No one, no.
So there's a warning there. And I think, we're sort of saying to CEOs, AI is like an intern.
Yeah.
Would you let an intern publish a blog without checking it?
Yeah.
And
you could also do it in different voices and the tone of and whatever. So, maybe that cracks it a little bit. But the way that I would suggest using AI is sometimes the hardest part of content creation is getting started.
Ideation
is the ideation piece.
Yes.
And AI could really help with that. And so therefore you might just say, give me an outline.
Yes.
And then you fill in the outline.
Yeah, brilliant. Good tip. Yep, definitely.
That is probably a non-cheats way of doing it. And if you don't care about cheating, there's so many ways that you can use AI. Well, I do.
Do you think it would be cheating if I came and sat down with you and said, hey, Marian, I've got a bit of a block. Can you help me with, how do I write something about this? And you gave me some ideas and I went away and wrote a blog.
Yeah, but I don't hand you the full thing and then you take it away and then publish under your name.
I think that it can be part of a workflow, but I do think you've got to own it, and that the guts of it's got to come from you. The framework has to come from you. It can't come from the AI.
It can definitely be part of a workflow. There's a really cool startup here who went through our incubator and then went through Electrify as well, but with two different companies, and they've totally met and they get on like a house on fire, and they're both absolutely smashing it with the startup that they created together, which is called Contented.ai.
Okay.
And they're showing organizations how to use AI to automate workflows, and a lot of that is obviously around marketing.
Brilliant.
And there's plenty of that stuff on the web, but you might check that out too. I think there's a real opportunity here for shaving costs, for shaving money in those early stages.
You still need your plan. You still need your brief. You've got to be clear
strategy.
why you're doing it. Yeah, I think that's a good call. Okay, last couple of questions. What do you think? Like, get your crystal ball out. What do you see in store for the New Zealand tech sector? What are the headwinds and the tailwinds that we might face in the next couple of years, do you think? Let's talk about tailwinds. Let's be positive. What do we think that's coming down the line that's going to help Kiwi tech?
Well, hopefully some of the changes that we've recommended in the Upstart Nation report will begin to happen and pay dividends. I mean, it was extremely encouraging to me that Judith Collins, in her strategy, picked up the recommendation for a head of startups, and instead it's called head of tech. Well, that'll do.
Yeah.
And called it head of tech. And she's picked up another innovation-based portfolio, which is space minister.
Yeah.
And I went to the launch of I don't know if it was a launch, but it was a celebration for Rocket Lab at Beehive last night. And it's very clear that she's boots and all in the space. She's so passionate about it. And then it was also very encouraging that in the 100-day plan, the problem around ESOP, the employee stock option issue, and the tax implications of that, which have meant that that early stage startups can't use it as incentive for employees, which limits their talent options. That was at the top of the economic plan for the first 100 days. And so I know that's already underway. So straight away we can see they're listening. Straight away we have a minister who's all over it. And wants to be all over it. And Judith Collins is opening Electrify Aotearoa. She was there last year.
Yeah.
And she has been doing tech summits for the last, I think, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. She did a tech summit in Auckland at Outside Ventures, which was awesome.
The TIN report up there. She spoke very passionately around tech. So no, you're right. She
sees this. She knows this.
Yeah.
But the one issue, well, let's continue with tailwinds. So with that kind of focus, if she has the bandwidth, because man, she has a portfolio.
She's got 7.
It's crazy. And then of course we have Minister Lee, who's around economic development. And so Minister Lee obviously has her eye on the ball as far as how we're going to grow as an economy, and startup is a huge part of that. But it's about really trying to focus attention on, well, actually, there is all this, but this is the piece that is most transformative. And I don't yet have a strong relationship with Minister Lee, but we were lucky enough to meet her very early on in the piece, and so that's a very promising opportunity to develop along with Minister Collins. So I think and then there's some work around visas and talent, which I believe is underway. So piece by piece, some of those key levers that our government can start to press are being pressed. But there's many more that need to be pressed. And the concern that I have is that in all of this, that they don't just pick out the levers that apply to the capital problems. Capital is so important, and you would not believe the impact of NZGCP. What was that, 3 years ago, maybe 4?
Yes.
When the well-being budget was announced and 300 million was put into, was that 300 million into NZGCP fund of funds. The impact on our startups was incredible. It was truly incredible. Nice, yeah. We went from basically being able to introduce our founders to 2 or 3 VCs who they were too early for, and then some angels who were keen but not really in the position to invest. And so all that early stuff, it took so long, so much longer than our peers around the world, to get a whiff of seed to be able to keep going, to build and to scale. And that means that you're missing so much opportunity, and many people just have to walk away because they can't bootstrap forever, and they can only borrow a certain amount from friends, family, mortgages, and banks. And so that limitation really, the impact of the NZGCP stuff was enormous. So
we want to see more of that.
We want to see more of that, and I know that's on the plan as well. But what I'm worried about is that for most of the people who are working on these levers, they're focusing on capital, and they're not focusing on the harder problems, because you don't have startups to invest in if you don't have a pipeline. And so therefore you need to go further back. And I think people are reacting against, innovation theater that comes from accelerators. And I understand that. We don't need to have another school show where everyone gets a high five and well done at the very end without anyone really moving on from there. But at this stage, we have shown again and again that we are now creating a flywheel that has impact. Yeah. And so what we need to be doing is building a national playbook for how this early stage work gets done. And if we can all collaborate together and have our swim lanes and defragment our country, it is going to be so much easier to drive efficiency and impact into the early stage pipeline. Yeah, and that's exactly what we need. Yes. We need to have that kind of burgeoning groundswell where we are able to immediately or quickly identify those highly capable founders, get a fire underneath them no matter where they are, and bring them into the scene and give them every support they need to succeed.
To get them, that's like an ignition moment.
That's right.
Yeah, got it.
That's right.
Love that.
And so I am concerned about that. Yeah. And there's all this talk about, these larger government departments that may merge, may this, may that, as if people aren't necessarily being the most efficient that they can be. That pipeline piece has been underinvested in for years. Yeah. It comes in 3-year cycles. And this is the piece that needs government intervention, because there are no investors in this world other than your mom and dad and maybe your good friends who will invest in you when you have no money, you have no proof, and you just have an idea. Yeah. Right? So this is a long-term play by government. And that's exactly what LaunchVic recognized, is that there were 2 key components. The first one was capital. The second one was startups. And they increased capital. And then, oh gosh, they didn't have enough really good founders. So they had to work on their pipeline. And then they would work on more capital stuff. And then they would work on their pipeline. You can't do one without the other.
So it has to be done in tandem.
Yes.
Yeah, together. Yes. Brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that. We're running out of time. One last question. What are you reading? What's on your read list if you get any time, or audiobooks or podcast, or what is it that where you get your you get some of that fire and passion and knowledge and even interest?
Books I'm reading are probably not of interest to probably everyone at the moment. I just finished because of what's going on in my life. I just finished David Downs' book on, a spot of, was it a mild spot of cancer? Yes. I think it was, because he's my hero. I love David. Sure. And I'm so lucky to be able to work with him. And he's been an incredible, mover and shaker around this ecosystem, making so much impact for so many years now. Yeah. So I really wanted to read his book and find out about his journey. And then apart from that, I think in terms of startup and startup books, I really loved, my favorite book in startup land, I think, is The Hard Thing About Really Hard Things. And I've
not read that. The Hard Thing About Really Hard Things.
I think I've got that title right. Anyone who hears it will go, oh yeah, that one.
Yeah.
I think. But it is really all about the real challenges and how you might address them, the incredible failures, the pressure, but some real nuggets of wisdom from someone who really has been there and done that. So the guy who wrote it is the guy from Anderson and Horowitz.
Yeah, right.
And it's all about obviously that ecosystem and his own journey through it. And I thought that was a great book, and I refer to it on a regular basis.
Okay. That's a good recommendation. We'll make sure we put that in the blog that supports this. Marian, wow, thank you so much. Really enjoy the conversation you've really given me, and hopefully the swayers in the audience something to listen to think about.
My pleasure.
So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great.
Thanks,
Thank you.